In 1962, three men pulled off a daring escape from the infamous Alcatraz prison, but no one knows for sure what happened after that. Mysterious postcards, phone calls, and letters made it seem like they may have survived, but no one could ever prove it. People claimed to have seen them in different cities like New Orleans or Rio de Janeiro, but the evidence was always unclear. Strange visitors at funerals who vanished just as quickly as they arrived added more confusion to the story, so where did they go? Today, we will explore the mystery of the Rock and the men who risked everything for a chance to escape. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, also known as the Rock, was one of the toughest prisons in the world. Built on a rocky island in San Francisco Bay, it was surrounded by icy, dangerous waters. From 1934 to 1963, it housed America's most dangerous criminals, including the infamous Al Capone, George Machine Gun Kelly, is that where he gets his name from? And Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz. The island wasn't just home to inmates. About 250 civilians lived there too, prison staff and their families. So they were also prisoners on the island pretty much. Life on Alcatraz was harsh, with strict rules and no hope of escape. At least that's what everyone thought. Frank Morris was no ordinary inmate. Born in Washington, D.C. in 1926, Morris had a tough childhood and turned to crime at a young age. But Morris wasn't just another criminal. He was also quite brilliant, with an IQ of 133. He loved to read, draw, and paint, and had a rare skill: escaping prisons. How do you develop that skill? Well, don't ask questions. Before Alcatraz, Morris had already escaped from two other high-security prisons. Officer Mills, who worked at Alcatraz, once described him as shy, neat, nice-looking young man. But Morris was much more than that. He was a calculating and determined person, a man who had made escape his life's mission. John and Clarence Anglin, brothers and co-conspirators in the escape, were known for their loyalty to each other and their daring nature. John, the older brother, was blonde with blue eyes. Clarence, taller and sturdier, had dark hair and hazel blue eyes. In 1958, the Anglin brothers were sentenced to 35 years in prison for robbing a bank, but their reputation for attempting escapes led them to Alcatraz, where security was supposedly unbeatable. What made them unique, though, was their incredible swimming ability. Growing up, they amazed their family by swimming in the icy waters of Lake Michigan, even when chunks of ice were floating around them. This skill would later become a key piece of their escape plan. Alan West was born in New York City on March 25th, 1929. He was no stranger to trouble or to escape attempts as well. In one daring breakout from Florida State Prison, West held a gun to the associate warden's head, stole his car keys, and then drove off in the man's car. But freedom didn't last long. West was eventually caught, and in 1957, he was sentenced to Alcatraz at the age of 28. At Alcatraz, West became known for one thing: talking endlessly about escaping. He wasn't just dreaming, he was also planning. In June of 1958, Alan West arrived at Alcatraz for the second time. January 1960, Frank Morris, a brilliant escape artist as mentioned previously, was placed in the cell next to West, which famously not a great... You do not want to get all these people together who know how to escape places, because they might start talking, in which case, not great. October 3rd of 1960, John Anglin was transferred to Alcatraz, and then in January of 1961, Clarence Anglin joined his brother John, also at Alcatraz. Why you would put them together? Once again, not a great plan. By June 11th, 1962, all four men had worked together to pull off what would become the greatest escape from the world's toughest prison. But only three of them made it out. West was left behind, and the story of their escape became one of the most famous prison break mysteries of all time. For more than a year, Morris, the Anglin brothers, and West worked on their plan. After the escape, investigators wondered who was the mastermind. West claimed that it was him, but with only an 8th grade education and a reputation for bragging, experts kind of doubt this claim. Morris, with the highest IQ and a history of brilliant escapes, seemed much more likely to be the brains behind the operation. Investigators even found articles on life jackets and boats in Morris's cell, not West's. Still, West played an important role. He knew Alcatraz better than anyone. Having been there before, he used his connections to begin gathering resources. The key to the escape was the prison's ventilator system. There were 8 ventilation shafts in the building, but only one wasn't cemented shut. The men realized that if they could climb up to the roof and remove the cover, then they could break free. West would make an important discovery. While cleaning up after the plumbers installed hot water faucets, he noticed water pipes that stretched all the way to the top of the prison. These pipes could act as a ladder, but there was one big problem. how would they actually get the vents open without tools or being caught, or most importantly, making a crap ton of noise? Morris first tried burning through the concrete with an electric cord from the ceiling light socket, but that didn't work. So the men turned to an old-fashioned method: digging. Every evening during the loud happy hour between 5:30 and 9:30 p.m., they chipped away at the concrete around the vents, using sharpened spoons stolen from the prison's mess hall. They worked slowly, creating tiny holes that they combined into bigger ones. To hide their progress, they covered the holes with wet toilet paper and then would smooth it over with soap to kind of blend it in. After months of digging, the concrete was finally loose enough for Morris to remove the vent grill. But that left a glaring hole. To hide it, Morris had used cardboard from the prison art supplies to make a fake grill. He painted it green and then drew a crisscross pattern that matched the original, and nobody thought this was suspicious. Each man also did the same. To be extra cautious, they hid the vents with the items like a concertina case or a long raincoat. The men had finally carved the vents large enough to escape through, but they faced a new challenge after all of this work. If their cells were found empty, the guards would sound the alarm immediately, so they needed decoys to buy time. That's where Oink and Oscar came in. Clarence Anglin, who worked in the prison barbershop, stole hair from the floor to use for the dummies. The first head, nicknamed Oink, was a rough creation made from rags covered with soap. Clarence added real hair for the eyebrows and lashes, but the half-finished head was so strange-looking that it became the butt of many jokes. The second dummy, Oscar, was much more realistic. The men used a mixture of toilet paper and soap to make a plaster-like material, carefully molding it into a full head. They painted the face and added hair to complete the illusion. Also, quick question, who is offering up their eyebrows for this head? On the night of the escape, the men left their dummies on their pillows. Under the blankets, they stuffed rolled up clothes and blankets to create the shape of their bodies. From the outside, it looked like they were sound asleep. While prison life went on as usual, Frank Morris and Anglin brothers, as well as Ellen West, were hard at work in a hidden workshop. There, they built everything they needed for their escape. To survive the icy waters of San Francisco Bay, they needed boats and a life jacket. Morris had read an article in Popular Mechanics that explained how to make life jackets. Using this knowledge, they crafted life jackets and two 6x14-foot pontoon rafts from 55 waterproof Navy raincoats. Again, how inventory would not have known that these were missing is well beyond me. To inflate the rafts, Morris removed the keys from his concertina and used the instrument as a makeshift air pump. He even crafted wooden paddles to steer the raft. Morris applied a technique called vulcanization, which he learned from the writings of Charles Goodyear. This process used heat to toughen the rubber, making the rafts and life jackets stronger and less likely to tear. The men didn't stop there. Morris then built a flashlight to guide them through the darkness of the bay. He used 2 pinlight batteries, a small plastic box, and a bulb to create a working light. A metal fastener acted as a switch, allowing them to turn it off and on. In the spring of 1962, Clarence Anglin climbed the pipes to the top of the cell block and reached the ceiling vent. But what he found there was discouraging. The ventilator was sealed with a heavy metal cap fastened by solid screws. Clarence tried to loosen the screws using a wrench that he made from metal clasps taken off his bed, but it wasn't strong enough. The plan seemed to have hit a dead end. That's when Alan West came up with a solution. When the prison's vacuum cleaner broke, West offered to fix it. Inside, he found 2 motors. He repaired the vacuum using one motor and secretly kept the other. West then attached the drill bits to the motor, creating a homemade drill. With this tool, the men were able to remove the screws and then free the ventilator cap. Their escape route was finally open. On the night of Sunday, June 10th, 1962, Frank Morris sent a message to the others. Tomorrow is the night. On that night, June 11th, 1962, the lights of Alcatraz went out at precisely 9:30 p.m., signaling the start of another quiet night on the Rock. But for Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, it was the moment that they had been waiting for. They carefully placed their dummies, Oink and Oscar, on their beds, stuffed their blankets to mimic their bodies, and then slipped out through the holes they had spent months digging into their cell walls. Alan West wasn't so lucky. While the others had finished their preparations, West's vent had still a stubborn edge of cement that needed to be removed. Panicked, he worked from inside his cell, chipping away at the concrete. Clarence Anglin, worried for his friend, tried to break through the hole from the other side using a pipe that Frank Morris had given him, but the noise was too loud. Time was running out, and the Anglins and Morris were growing anxious. At 10:30 p.m., with no time to spare, they made the painful decision to leave West behind and continue their escape. Frank Morris climbed up to the roof vent and then pulled the cap loose. The noise echoed through the prison like a thud of a hand hitting an empty oil drum. A guard in the West Gun Gallery heard it and reported it to the lieutenant on duty. The lieutenant searched the prison but found nothing unusual. Undeterred, the three escapees hurried across the rooftop. In their haste, they accidentally dropped a paddle and left behind a spare life vest and raft. At the edge of the roof, they descended a 45-foot pipe outside of the prison kitchen, but as John Anglin swung down, he hit the pipe too hard, causing another loud clang that was heard by guards at 10:45 p.m. By 11 p.m., Morris and the Anglins likely reached the water's edge. There, in the cover of darkness, they assembled their raft, inflated their life jackets, and pushed off into the icy waters of the San Francisco Bay. Meanwhile, back in the cell, Alan West worked furiously. He finally broke through the vent at 1:45 a.m., hours after the others had gone. Climbing to the roof, he found it empty. Alone and defeated, he stood in the dark, perhaps wondering if his friends had abandoned him or if they had been forced to leave him behind. With no other options, West then climbed back down the shaft, returned to his cell, and then slid into bed. He had been thoroughly left behind. The next morning at 7:15 a.m. on June 12th, Officer Lawrence Barlett began the routine head count in B Block. When he tried to wake Clarence Anglin, the sleeping prisoner wouldn't move. Confused, Barlett called out to Lieutenant Bill Long, "Lieutenant Bill, I got one that can't wake up." Long approached the cell, knelt down, and stuck his hand through the bars to nudge the prisoner awake. But when he tapped the pillow, something horrifying happened. The head flopped onto the floor, Long later recalled. The guard stared in shock at the broken nose in the dummy's face as it rolled onto the floor. Moments later, another officer shouted, "I got one here too," in front of Frank Morris's cell. Realizing that they had been duped, Long then sprinted to the phone and sounded the alarm. The morning after the daring Alcatraz escape, the island was in chaos. Guards rushed to investigate while officers searched every corner of the prison. In their hunt, they found a hidden workshop where the escapees had built tools, including rafts and paddles. The search stretched across the land, air, and water. Bloodhounds sniffed for trails, but the dogs only led the officers to the water's edge. The trail stopped cold there. It seemed the men had vanished into the bay. The FBI turned to Alan West, the man they had left behind. He was eager to talk, possibly out of anger at being abandoned, and West revealed the group's plan. According to him, the escapees planned to paddle their raft to Angel Island. There, they would rest before swimming across Raccoon Strait to Marin County. Once on shore, they intended to steal a car, rob a clothing store, and then split up to avoid capture. But the FBI couldn't find any proof to support West's story. In the days after the escape, strange clues began to appear. On the morning of June 12th, San Francisco police officer Robert Chechi reported seeing a mysterious boat in the bay near Alcatraz at around 1 a.m. The boat lingered for a while and then left, heading under the Golden Gate Bridge, and this raised some questions. Could the escapees have arranged for someone to come pick them up? The FBI dismissed Chechi's report, saying that it wasn't reliable. Later that day, searchers then found a wooden paddle floating around 100 yards from Angel Island. It matched the kind of paddles that the escapees had made in their workshop. On June 13th, a woman from San Rafael, which scholars maintain the translation was lost long ago, called the police, reporting that she had seen a raft carrying 3 men about 10 miles north of Alcatraz. Hope surged amongst the investigators, but when the FBI followed up, the men turned out to be nothing more than fishermen. On June 14th, a strange packet made of raincoat material was discovered floating in the water. Inside were sheets of paper and photographs of the Anglin brothers with friends and family. Later that day, a life jacket similar to the ones the escapees had crafted washed up on Cronkite Beach, and these items suggested the men had made it to the water, but had they made it out? On June 18th, a postcard arrived at Alcatraz addressed to the warden. It was signed by Frank, John, and Clarence and read, "Ha ha, we made it." But remember, shitposting has existed for all of humanity's existence. So, could somebody have been screwing with the warden? It's absolutely possible. But handwriting experts confirmed that Clarence Anglin did not write that postcard. However, they could not rule out the possibility that one of the brothers had written it. Was this a real clue or a cruel prank? On June 22nd, another life jacket was found floating near the east side of the Alcatraz. It had brown stains on it, possibly blood, and the ties on the jacket were still knotted. The inflation tube showed teeth marks as someone had been desperately trying to keep it inflated. The evidence seemed pretty serious, but the mystery deepened even further. On June 27th, the associate warden of Alcatraz received a startling phone call saying, "Ha ha, we meant," no, they didn't. The man on the line claimed to be Frank Morris, and he calmly said, "I guess you're glad to know that I'm alive." When the warden tried to ask personal questions to confirm the caller's identity, the man abruptly hung up. Alcatraz then closed its doors as a federal prison on March 21st, 1963. The government decided it was simply too expensive to maintain, but even after its closure, the mystery of the June 1962 escape continued to haunt authorities and the public alike. Many experts were skeptical. Shortly after the escape, Assistant Director Fred T. Wilkinson from the Federal Bureau of Prisons stated, "The tides and the wind that night were strong, and these convicts were not the athletic type. Only a trained athlete could make such a swim." And he bases that on absolutely nothing. Blubber keeps you warm and helps you float. But over the years, others have proven otherwise. Several people, including grade school younglings, have successfully swam the same treacherous waters, showing that survival wasn't impossible. In July 1962, just a month after the escape, a Norwegian ship named Norefjell probably reported a chilling sight. About 20 miles northwest of the Golden Gate Bridge, the crew saw a body floating in the water. It was wearing prison-issued pants. Unfortunately, the ship was headed to Canada and had no radio to alert authorities. When they finally returned to the US a month later, the crew reported the sighting to the FBI, but by then, the body was predictably gone. In 2014, scientists from Delft University studied the tides and currents from the night of the escape. Their findings offered hope. If the prisoners had launched their raft at exactly 11:30 p.m. on June 11th, they could have reached Horseshoe Bay. This timing would also explain why some of their belongings ended up on Angel Island. But timing was everything. If the men left earlier or later, the strong currents would have likely swept them out to sea. Guard testimonies confirmed that the raft was placed in the water around 11 p.m., leaving room for possibility. On November 30th, 1993, America's Most Wanted aired an interview with former bank robber Thomas Kent. Kent claimed to have inside knowledge of the escape. According to him, Clarence Anglin had arranged for an ex-girlfriend to meet them at the shores of the Tiburon with a car. She was supposed to drive them to Mexico, and from there, they planned to head to South America. Adding to this, FBI records show that Frank Morris owned a Teach Yourself Spanish book, perhaps preparing for a new life far from home. In 2003, the TV show Mythbusters attempted to recreate the escape using the same materials and designs as the prisoners. They built a raft and then paddled from Alcatraz to the mainland. The experiment was a success, proving that a raft could indeed make the journey. The FBI was curious about how reliable the prisoners' homemade life jackets even might have been. To test them, agents reinflated the recovered life jackets and then added weights to simulate real conditions. The results were surprising. All 3 life jackets held air well enough to keep someone afloat for about an hour. Even after some air leaked, a prisoner could still stay above the water by occasionally blowing into the dipstick. The mystery of the Alcatraz escape deepened with clues that were either dismissed or really never fully explained. According to the 2011 National Geographic documentary, Vanished from Alcatraz, old FBI files revealed a startling discovery. On June 12, 1962, the day after the escape, a raft was reportedly found on Angel Island. Footprints led away from the raft, but no further information was ever released to the public. The same day, a 1955 blue Chevrolet with California license plate KPB-076 was reported stolen in Marin County. This detail was mentioned in the local newspapers, including the Humboldt Times and the San Francisco Examiner, but was never formally reported to the FBI. The next day, on June 13th, a motorist in Stockton, California, 80 miles east of San Francisco, claimed that 3 men in a blue Chevrolet forced him off the road. These sightings suggest that the escapees may have survived and then continued their journey inland. So let's talk about some theories real quick. The main one being that the trio survived. The most popular theory is that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers made it to freedom. Over the decades, countless stories have surfaced about where they might have gone and how they stayed hidden. U.S. Marshal Michael Dyke, actually, who took over the case in 2003, admitted that there was enough evidence to make him wonder if the men actually did survive. For years, the Anglin's mother reported receiving roses on special occasions, always delivered without a card. Even more shocking, witnesses claimed that John and Clarence Anglin attended their mother's funeral in 1973. They were said to be disguised as women, blending into the crowd despite heavy FBI surveillance. In 2015, a History Channel documentary, Alcatraz Search for the Truth, said that the Anglin family revealed Christmas cards with handwriting confirmed to be from John and Clarence. However, none of the envelopes had postmarked stamps, leaving the delivery date a complete mystery. The same documentary also presented a photo said to show the Anglin brothers in Brazil. 13 years after their escape, the photo was taken by Fred Brizzi, a friend of the Anglins, who claimed he ran into them in Rio de Janeiro in the 1970s. Forensic experts working with the Anglin family analyzed the photo and concluded that it was likely taken in 1975. They determined that the men in the photo were more than likely John and Clarence, though the poor quality and their sunglasses made it impossible to say for sure. Retired U.S. Marshal Art Roderick called this photo the best lead in decades. In January of 2020, facial recognition experts at IdenTV analyzed the photo and concluded the men were indeed John and Clarence Anglin. In 2016, a man named John Leroy Kelly made a stunning claim on his deathbed. Speaking to a nurse, Kelly confessed that he and an accomplice had helped 3 inmates escape from Alcatraz. Kelly said that they waited in a white boat in the bay. As the prisoners paddled towards the shore, they picked them up and then traveled north along the coast to Seattle. This account matches a report from off-duty San Francisco police officer Robert Cecchi, who claimed to have seen a white boat with its lights off near the marina on the night of their escape. Cecchi said that the boat turned on the spotlight, scanned the water, and then disappeared into the night. The FBI dismissed this account at the time because they're the FBI. I think Wendigoon said it best, man. They refused to search the skeleton pile, and when they did, they found skeletons. In January of 2018, a letter surfaced that then shocked the world. It was allegedly written by John Anglin, one of the infamous escapees from Alcatraz. The letter began simply, but carried an incredible claim. My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morris. I am 83 years old and in bad shape. I have cancer. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely. The writer went on to explain that Clarence had died in 2008 and Frank Morris had passed away in 2005. The most surprising part of the letter came next. John offered to reveal his location in exchange for a promise. If you announce on TV that I will be promised to first go to jail for no more than a year and get medical attention, I will write back to let you know exactly where I am. This is no joke. The letter was brought to light by CBS San Francisco, which reported obtaining it from an unnamed source. The FBI had tested the letter for fingerprints years earlier, but the results were inconclusive. Was this truly John Anglin's confession, or was it just another piece of the puzzle meant to keep the mystery alive? For decades, the story of Alcatraz escape has captivated imaginations. It has been the subject of documentaries, movies, and countless theories. After digging through every piece of evidence in every account, one thing feels clear. They pretty much survived. They definitely survived that thing. The trio spent over a year crafting their plan. This was not a hasty or careless attempt, and really, what else did they have time to do? They made life vests, a raft, and decoys for their cells. These men were resourceful and determined. It's hard to believe that they would set out into the bay without a strategy for what they wanted to do once they reached the water. Clarence and John Anglin had grown up swimming in Florida's rivers. They were strong swimmers accustomed to challenging waters. Even if their raft had failed, they could have likely swam to the shore. Scientists studying the tides that night concluded it was possible for someone to stay afloat for 2 hours, enough time to reach the shoreline. Their life jackets were tested and found to be functional. The chance of all 3 drowning kind of seems unlikely, especially since no bodies were ever recovered, despite a massive search by helicopters, boats, and divers. The old FBI files reveal another intriguing detail, actually. A raft was discovered on Angel Island, along with footprints, again, leading away from it. Was this their raft? The FBI really never officially confirmed it, but the discovery fits perfectly with their plan. Shortly after the escape, a 1955 blue Chevrolet, again, was reported stolen in Marin County. The timing and location match up to these escapees' route, but strangely, again, the FBI never followed up on the report. Could this have been their getaway car? Years later, an alleged photo just happens to show up in Brazil. Experts examined the photo and concluded this was more than likely the Anglin brothers. But again, who knows? In the 2018 letter, if this is genuine, it may be the last clue we'll ever get. It tells us that Clarence Anglin died in 2008, Frank Morris passed away in 2005, and John Anglin, who was terminally ill in 2018, likely died shortly after writing the letter. Whether the letter was real or not, one thing remains for certain. Their escape was one of the most daring and clever acts of history, and probably worked. But what do you think? Did they find their freedom on the shores of Brazil, or did their journey into the dark waters of the bay? The mystery continues to live on. But luckily, I am here to espouse my crackhead ideas, because that's pretty much what this channel has become. If I had to take a crack at it, considering Mythbusters put together that raft, it made it. Considering that their life vests were pretty much watertight, not watertight, but allowed enough air to stay in to keep them afloat, and if they blew into it, it would still continue to keep them afloat. It seems like everything pretty much falls in line. And considering it was June in California, in Southern California, I believe San Francisco's in Southern California, I believe the waters, while probably still cold, may have been warm enough for them to survive it and then get to shore, especially if a boat was there to pick them up. It just seems like there were a lot of instances where it clearly shows they survived. The letters, the cars being stolen, that also could have just been somebody screwing around like, oh, it forced me off the road. Like, I'm pretty sure, though, you wouldn't want to draw attention to yourself if you had just stolen a vehicle and you have 3 convicts with you. Not a great plan. However, everything else seems to kind of fall in line to show that they did survive. And the 1960s in South America, it's not like the US was really looking down there for anybody. It's just not really that, I guess, concerning of a place. I mean, nowadays, obviously, I think Belize, according to the John McAfee video I did, there's no extradition there, but, you know, I think that they could have easily done that. And you're kind of wondering probably, well, how did they talk to their girlfriend or that girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, whatever? How did they, you know, get in contact with people? Pretty easily. They didn't record things like they record now. Like, all phone calls are recorded. But back then, if you met them and talked quiet enough, you could be like, hey, we're planning on escaping. We need somebody on a boat. You've got somebody on the outside who can kind of arrange all that for you, pick you up, and then do what they need to do. But it's also interesting they didn't put any pressure on any accomplices. I'm sure they did, but it just doesn't seem like it. They probably would have cracked had it been the case, but who's to say? But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leave a like, it'd be great of you, and subscribing is a great way to stay up to date when I post. If you did enjoy, I mean, I know I just said that, but like if you made it this far, you're clearly enjoying this type of stuff. So likes do help this video get out there. I am definitely trying to keep this channel going in 2025, like as like a legitimate thing. So, you know, if you want to support it, that'd be amazing. But speaking of support, let me thank the people that do support this channel over on Patreon. At the Literal Wendigo tier, we have Grayson West, Monkey Man, and Stupid Fox. Thank you guys. At the Eyewitness to the Event tier, we have Vera Malaga and Dragon Master Knight. At the First Hand Accounts tier, we have Pimp Daddy Shamrock and Yeeps. At the Second Hand Accounts tier, we have Bianca and Fred Rush, as well as Troy. And to the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate y'all's support as well. It goes a long way towards helping, so thank you. But that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.